And now, aviation weather around Alaska. I'm National Weather Service meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska aviation weather outlook as we go through this New Year's holiday weekend. And we have a fair amount of active weather that's going to be increasing here, especially in the early New Year once we get past New Year's Day. In the meantime, Sunday, there's going to be at least 3 low pressure systems, one south of the Panhandle, another one just in the Western Gulf, and another one south of the tip of the Alaska Peninsula, eastern Aleutians. Those systems will provide some weather here heading up through New Year's Eve day and New Year's Day. But then as we go through the holiday time frame into the middle of next week, a strong low is going to cross the central Bering, or I should say cross the central Aleutians up into the Bering and then move somewhere here in the lower Yukon Delta by the time we get into Wednesday and Thursday morning. And that system is going to have a lot of impacts, a lot of wind and active weather. Meantime, big area of high pressure sitting up over the Arctic Ocean, and the pressure gradient across much of the mainland and along the Arctic coast is really going to be tightening up. Brisk easterly winds cause areas of blowing and drifting snow and bitter cold wind chills in some areas. And this is all going to be happening right around and just after New Year's Day, especially through the middle of next week. So as we go through Sunday morning, there will be IFR conditions, Western Gulf up into Cook Inlet, also off the southwest coast, Etolan Strait, all the way back out to St. Matthew, and then along the Arctic coast. We have areas of freezing fog as well, even in the interior scattered about, because it's been quite cold. Low temperatures as of this Saturday morning have been as cold as 30s to near 40 below in parts of the interior. So by the time we get into Sunday afternoon, New Year's Eve day, we find IFR conditions northern Gulf around Prince William Sound, eastern Kenai, also down around Kodiak Island and on especially the Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula, and then again more IFR Nunavik Island westward to St. Matthew, and then areas of IFR here along the Arctic coast. And then by the time we get into New Year's Day morning, we expect rather extensive MVFR conditions here along the Gulf, IFR along the Alaska Peninsula on up into the southeast Bering, again, Nunavik Island, Etolan Strait to St. Matthew. There's going to be a first in a series of lows lifting up out of the North Pacific across and approaching the Alaska Peninsula here around New Year's Day into Tuesday, but the more substantial system will be crossing the central Aleutians on Tuesday before emerging into the Bering. Also, winds are going to be picking up here after New Year's Day. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday could be blizzard conditions along areas of the Arctic coast with very brisk east-northeast winds. For New Year's Day afternoon, we expect IFR conditions to increase along the Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, and then extending northwestward up through Nunavik Island to St. Lawrence Island to just south of the Bering Strait, and then hints there of the IFR with that next stronger low across the central Aleutians by New Year's Day afternoon. So Anaktuvuk Pass on Sunday, we'll see MVFR conditions for the last day of 2023. Adigan Pass also MVFR. Now, as we round down along the Alaska range, expect some areas of IFR in the morning becoming MVFR at Lake Clark and Merrill. Same thing for Rainy Pass. As we go up to Windy Pass, try to hold on to VFR conditions there during the day Sunday. Further east, VFR Isabel and Mentasta. As we drop down into the Copper River Basin, VFR becoming MVFR. And again, any of these interior areas, there are pockets of IFR conditions due to ice fog, especially there during the morning hours and redeveloping in the evening. Portage Pass should see generally IFR conditions on Sunday. MVFR here back toward the west entrance, but certainly the eastern half of the pass into Prince William Sound, IFR on Sunday. Chilkoot and White will see MVFR conditions become VFR. Freezing levels, first of all, at the surface, we can see pretty much much of the mainland below freezing except for along the immediate coastlines of the Gulf. We have temperatures above freezing extending into the inner channels to the intercoastal mountains. And at freezing levels aloft are at or above 2,000 feet, well south of the Panhandle and Haida Gwaii. And we find freezing levels higher here up in north central Canada in excess of 6,000 feet. But over Alaska, cold air is in place. We certainly have had some very cold temperatures in areas of the interior in the 30s to near 40 below this weekend. Now, by icing threat, where we have thicker cloud cover and some areas of precipitation, there's the potential for moderate icing above 4,000 feet areas of the Gulf on Sunday. Also up here along the eastern part of the Brooks Range, Yukon Flats, there could be isolated moderate icing, generally above 4,000 feet, and then areas extending back out above 4,000 feet into the western Aleutians. Winds aloft, not especially strong across most of the mainland, though we do have a southwesterly flow of winds at 30,000 feet, up to 90 knots off the southwest coast. There is a much stronger jet core in excess of 170 knots here southwest of the Aleutians in the North Pacific. And as we look at things at 700 millibars, 9,000 feet, we find the next area belt of stronger winds, 60, 80 knots coming up from the North Pacific, approaching this region of the Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island. Also some stronger winds over the Chukchi Sea, 40 to 50 knots along the Russian coastline. And as we go further south and west, we see some winds here over the central western Aleutians, 30, 40 knots. And finally, bringing things down to 3,000 feet. So here's the next weather maker. That's going to be the low that comes up toward the Alaska Peninsula area. We find winds 50, 60, as high as 75 knots on the northwest quadrant of this low, lifting out of the North Pacific. There is a little belt of tighter winds along the northern Gulf Coast, northwestern area there, just outside of the eastern Kenai Prince William Sound, that could be in the 45 to 55 knot range. So that will definitely lend towards some turbulence. And then up here, notice the winds either side of the Brooks Range and along the north slope, some pockets of 50, 55 knot winds out of the east-southeast. This area here is going to see those winds strengthen as we get past New Year's Day, especially later New Year's Day into Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, some very strong winds creating ground blizzard conditions up there. So keep that in mind. There's, at this time, a winter storm watch for that time frame as a big heads up in advance. Turbulence, the greatest threat of turbulence on Sunday will be across areas of the northwestern Gulf, surface to 5,000 feet, as well as over the northern half of the Alaska Peninsula, clipping the south end of Kodiak Island. We find also an area of moderate turbulence likely along the Brooks Range and into the North Slope, extending off of Cape Lisburne, Point Hope areas, surface to 4,000 feet. Also, surface to 3,000 foot to moderate turbulence possible, especially west side of St. Lawrence Island. And then finally here, down across the western central Aleutians, we may see some moderate turbulence, surface to 3,000 feet.